Self-defense. When we are falsely accused, it is not wrong to defend ourselves, but when we do, we should always reflect the fruit of the Holy Spirit. Here's Gene to explain.
We're going to see this in the life of the Apostle Paul. Now, we're also going to see that in defending oneself, you can still reflect the fruit of the Spirit and be very direct in some respects in terms of what your concerns are, especially when it's not protecting yourself, but it's protecting others. And we'll see that part of Paul's intensity was protecting others and what it was doing to the church in Corinth. So in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, beginning in verse 1, Paul says, "Now I, Paul, make a personal appeal to you by," and notice this phrase, very important, "by the gentleness and graciousness of Christ." In other words, there is a reflection of the fruit of the Spirit in his life. "I'm making a personal appeal to you with the gentleness and graciousness of Christ. And here he gets a bit tongue-in-cheek, but pretty direct, "I who am humble among you in person, but bold towards you when absent." That was one of the things he was being accused of. "I beg you that when I am present, I will not need to be bold with the confidence by which I plan to challenge certain people who think we are walking in a fleshly way." That was a serious, erroneous attack on the Apostle Paul by these false apostles, accusing him of walking in a fleshly way. There wasn't anything further from the truth than that kind of accusation. And so Paul speaks to that issue. He continues on. Look at what is obvious. If anyone is confident that he belongs to Christ, he should remind himself of this. Just as he belongs to Christ, so do we. For if I boast some more about our authority, which the Lord gave, for what purpose? Building you up. Not to demonstrate my authority, to bolster my own ego, to show my position as an apostle. But my authority is to build you up. It's not for tearing you down. And by the way, there's a subtle innuendo there because the apostles, the false apostles, were tearing them down. They didn't realize it, but they were being torn down spiritually. And he says, consequently, I'm not ashamed. I'm not ashamed of defending myself because my defense is based on the fact that I care about you people. That is my motivation. I don't want to seem as though I am trying to terrify you with my letters, as I've been accused of. That's the implication there. For it is said, his letters are weighty and powerful, get this, but his physical presence is weak. That's a pretty serious criticism. You know, when he writes to us, weighty, powerful. But when he's here, weak. And his public speaking is despicable. Wow. That's quite a criticism of the Apostle Paul. Now, Paul never claimed to be an orator, but to say that his speaking was despicable, a man who God used to change the world in many, many respects, is a horrible criticism. Now, you see, he could have addressed this attack right up at the beginning of the letter, but he didn't. He's moving towards this, and now he's getting very direct in his defense and telling us, through this letter, what he knew about these criticisms. When he began to write this letter, he knew all this. Such a person should consider this: what we are in the words of our letter, when absent, we will be in actions when present. In other words, later on we're going to see that he's going to tell them that he does not want to use his apostolic authority and power. He doesn't want to use it to discipline them. He wants them to respond to him, to what he's saying. And so he's saying, however, you leave me no choice, because when I come, you will see that it's just not words in a letter, but you will see it in my actions. And so consequently, he is saying here, I don't want to do that, but I will, in defending myself. Moving on to verse 17, he says, so the one who boasts must boast in the Lord. that is the only reason for boasting. And he's going to do some boasting, but he's going to do it in a very, very fascinating way. And in a moment, we're going to take a look at the whole culture of the Roman Empire, the Greco-Roman Empire, in terms of boasting and how they communicated and what was expected in terms of this communication. 2 Corinthians 12:12, we talk about apostolic authority, and I want to share with you, if we have to defend ourselves, and there are occasions when we do, and it's not wrong. It needs to be done carefully, but when we do, we need to realize a couple of things. Number one, we do not have apostolic authority. Paul had apostolic authority. We do not have that authority. What was the manifestation or the verification of his authority? Well, he said in 2 Corinthians 12:12, the signs of an apostle were performed among you. When I was with you, when I founded this church, the signs of an apostle were performed among you in all endurance. Do you remember that? He's saying, not only signs, but also wonders and miracles. That was one of the verifications of an apostle, the ability to work these miracles. Now, as you get into this section of the letter, and when we get into the letter that he wrote to the Galatians, we're going to see that Paul sounded pretty harsh and pretty direct. But if you go to Titus, when he wrote to Titus, who was establishing churches in Crete, you'll see why he became direct, why he became harsh, as it were. He says, for there are also many rebellious people, idle talkers, deceivers, especially those from Judaism. And we'll see that these false apostles had come probably from Jerusalem. And they were posing as apostles. And they said they had the same authority or more authority than even the Apostle Paul. And so Paul faced that all over the Roman world. He faced it in Crete. There were pockets of communities of Judaism. Or they came from Jerusalem and they came in following the Apostle Paul's ministry and tried to destroy the church. And notice what happened here in Crete. It is necessary to silence them, these false prophets. Why? They overthrow whole households. They're destroying whole households, leading whole households astray by teaching for dishonest gain. Their primary motive is what they can get out of you or out of these people. They're deceivers, they're dishonest, and he quotes one of their own prophets or philosophers in Crete. He says, one of their own prophets said, Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, and lazy gluttons. That's what their own people said about some of these people. And so Paul is dealing with some pretty serious stuff here. And these were the guys like this here in Crete that were attacking Paul in Corinth. And that will help us to understand why he appealed based on the gentleness and the graciousness of Christ, but he also, by implication, says that Jesus Christ could take a cord and deal with the wickedness of the Judaizers, even in Jerusalem, when he cleaned out the temple and overturned the tables in the temple, where they were using that as a marketplace. So we do not have apostolic authority. We need to realize that. And that is very important, I think, when it comes to defending ourselves. But number two, we should allow others to speak for us and substantiate that we're being falsely accused. Even Paul did this. We saw this in 1 Corinthians with this principle. When we are falsely accused, we should have someone who knows us well verify our true character. That's always the better way to go. And Paul did that. He said, Timothy will verify who I am. He will testify to my credibility, to my integrity. And he did the same thing with Titus when he sent Titus. And so this really applies, I think, if the Apostle Paul had to do this, and he was an apostle, how much more we need others to speak for us in relationship to verifying our credibility if indeed we're falsely accused. And then thirdly, we should always defend ourselves with the gentleness and graciousness of Christ. Sometimes even taking the silent approach, turning the other cheek, as it were. That takes wisdom to know when to do that. But Galatians 5:22-23 certainly expands on the gentleness and graciousness of Christ. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faith, gentleness, self-control. And basically, I think to this point in this letter, you see Paul really attempting to reflect the gentleness and the graciousness of Christ until he reached this point in the letter, and now he's really dealing with the issues and what's going on there in Corinth. Well, this leads to an interesting question, and that is, how can we discern what are acceptable ways to defend ourselves against false accusations? Because that takes a lot of wisdom. And, in 50 years of ministry, periodically I've been falsely accused. First thing is I try to listen to see whether there's any validity to it. But when I know there's no validity, at least that's what seems to be verified, we need to seek wisdom from others. I remember in one personal experience when I was really, really incensed by what I felt was immorality, what I felt was evil, what I felt was wrong in a particular situation, and I wrote a letter. And I sent this letter to 4 significant people within this very well-known Christian organization. But before I sent the letter exposing what I felt was sincere, what was definitely sin, I ran it by 2 godly men. One was an attorney, a Christian attorney that I knew really well. Another was another pastor that I knew very well. They both read this letter and they said, "Gene, don't do it. Don't send it. This is not the time. It will be misinterpreted." And they knew the larger context. It will appear vindictive, and don't do it. Trust God for His timing to deal with this situation. Frankly, I didn't like what I heard, but I respected these men, and I backed off. And it was a very wise decision. It was good wisdom, because it would have been misinterpreted. And when God eventually opened the door to deal with the issue, it just opened the door wide open. And I was not implicated in the sense of unfolding the story. It came from other sources, and it was dealt with.